It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, Boris Johnson supporter Ross Thompson, Jeremy Hunt supporter Alistair Burt, Liberal Democrat MP Layla Moran and The Mirror's political editor Pippa Crerar. So, what's going on today?
I, for one, would be prepared to go and seek judicial review to prevent Parliament being bypassed.
A former Tory Prime Minister says he'll take a future Tory Prime Minister to court to stop them shutting down Parliament. The two men who want the top job tear chunks out of each other.
The difference between you and me is you are peddling optimism.
There's only one way to get this country off the hamster wheel of doom, and that is to get Brexit done.
Have you been trying to silence victims of anti-Semitism, Mr Corbyn?
Good morning, how nice to see you.
Is anti-Semitism out of control in the Labour Party?
How nice to see you. Goodbye.
And Labour tears itself apart as three of its peers resign.
It's just not sustainable to continue. You have to take a decision about what your own ethics are.
Let's start today's show with a little bit more from the former Conservative Prime Minister, John Major.
Let's strip away the jargon of proroguing and contemplate what this actually means. What it means that a Prime Minister Johnson presumably, because he cannot persuade Parliament to agree with his policy, will close down Parliament so that he can bypass it until his policy comes into operation. If that were to happen, I think there would be a queue of people who would seek judicial review. The Queen's decision cannot be challenged in law, but the Prime Minister's advice to the Queen can, I believe, be challenged in law, and I, for one, would be prepared to go and seek judicial review to prevent Parliament being bypassed.
Well, extraordinary intervention there from John Major. The response from Team Boris Johnson is a source saying John Major has gone completely mad. His plan is absurd. Is the source right, Ross?
Well, I do find it a bizarre intervention from John Major when I think it was he himself that actually prorogued Parliament to avoid a cash for access issue being raised in Parliament. But look, at the end of the day, all of us accept that whoever is elected leader of our party, we have to unite behind. We have been plagued by division for the last couple of years, and whoever is elected, we should get behind. And given that John Major was a big advocate during his time as Prime Minister, that we should unite behind our leader, I hope he would understand that. And we should all get behind, whether it's Boris Johnson, Jeremy Hunt, and take the country forward.
Alistair?
John Major would not have made his intervention this morning if Boris Johnson had answered a question yesterday and said he was not in any way prepared to prorogue Parliament.
Or shut it down, yeah.
But he didn't. The opportunity was there to end this once and for all, which is what we all want. Jeremy Hunt was very clear. He won't consider such a step. We know that Brexit is difficult, and Ross is absolutely right. We know we've got to get through this and come together, and the country must go forward. But using such an unconstitutional means would be, I think, catastrophic. Now, we don't need to be there. If Boris Johnson would say very clearly he has no intention of proroguing Parliament, then we don't need to consider any of these things.
Why doesn't he rule it out?
I think, Paul, I've been to Hustings, I've watched the debates. I think Boris has been quite clear that he doesn't want to use our key.
No, but why doesn't he rule it out?
But at the end of the day, when you're in a negotiation, which we are with the European Union, you can't start ruling things out. You have to have every option on the table, even though you don't want to use it. I think it's absolutely wrong that when you want to achieve the best deal for the country, any lawyer would tell you, going into any negotiation on any issue, you don't rule anything out. And I think it's absolutely right that Boris Johnson doesn't do it.
You do rule out bypassing Parliament. You do rule out taking down the essence of our democracy. And by proroguing Parliament at a point where we are facing a potential catastrophe of no deal on October the 31st, bypassing Parliament, bypassing us representing our constituents and their interests, that's what proroguing means.
Yes.
It means we
But no
don't
one's
get
arguing
any
that.
votes.
No one wants that.
Well, why doesn't Boris Johnson just say he doesn't want that
He
then?
will achieve a deal. We won't need to, because he is the only candidate in this leadership election that will achieve a deal before the 31st.
And Layla, my question was, is John Major's plan the idea that he would go to court, a former Conservative Prime Minister taking the next Conservative Prime Minister to court, is that completely mad?
No, I think it is it's an extraordinary intervention by a man, and I never thought I was going to be a John Major fan in my life.
But you've
I have
discovered
to
it
say,
today, have you?
Not just today. I think his thoughtful interventions all the way through along this process are worth listening to. And so, for someone like that, who is not known for his high drama, suggesting that he's going to do this, I think underlines the issue we potentially have with a Boris Johnson Prime Ministership.
I think it's really fascinating that it's almost 26 years this month, that John Major was caught on tape describing some of his Eurosceptic cabinet ministers as, and I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this word, a B word anyway. And
don't say it.
And here we are, all this time later, and Europe is still dividing the Tory party. The Tory party is still obsessed with it. And meanwhile, what happens to the rest of the country? What happens to public services and to people's lives and to the economy? It feels, from a public perspective, it looks like the Tory party is infighting about this. The Tory leadership contest has been completely overshadowed by Brexit. And meanwhile, the rest of the country burns.
Well, let's have a listen to a little bit more from that debate last night and Boris Johnson on this subject about shutting down Parliament.
Well, I'm not going to take anything off the table any more than I'm going to take no deal
so no answer.
off the table. And I think it's absolutely bizarre at this stage in the negotiations for the UK yet again to be weakening its own position.
Alistair?
As we said, if he doesn't want to prorogue Parliament, he doesn't want to get into this constitutional difficulty, he simply has to say, we're not going to do this. No one is asking for no deal to be taken off the table. It's now an arguable point, but both candidates have made very clear that they want to keep no deal on the table because they see that as part of their negotiation, and they've both set that out clearly. So it's perfectly plausible for a Prime Minister to come back to Parliament and say, I have done everything I can, and put the question of no deal to Parliament. Then Parliament takes a choice. But I have to say, it's not just the Conservatives that are consumed with this. The country as a whole is divided 50-50. There is one clear party that wants to stay in, that's the Liberal Democrats. There's the Brexit Party with their clear views. Both the major parties are full of the difficulty that Brexit and Europe has caused for 20, 30, 40 years, which is why we do have to solve this. We do have to move on as a country, and I think we should by leaving and finding the best relationship with Europe for the future,
Alistair,
which is why I support an agreement. And I think Jeremy Hunt is better placed than Boris Johnson, because why would the EU want to do a deal with the person who has led the campaign to take the United Kingdom out when there are others snapping at the heels of the European Union looking for causes of concern? I think they'll do a much better deal with Jeremy Hunt, and then we'll be able to create the relationship we need with a Europe which is clearly also going to have to change.
Ross?
Well, I think Alistair made the point there that Boris Johnson led the campaign to leave. He believes in Brexit, head, heart, body and soul. We've already had a Prime Minister that was a convert but didn't believe. Now is the time to have a believer in Brexit who knows how to get it over the line. And actually, the EU will take that more seriously. This is the guy that led a huge
some of the believers
campaign.
actually voting for it. I voted to remain in the EU. I have voted consistently to leave the EU. We have got colleagues who profess that they wanted to leave, but they only want to leave on their terms. And for some of them, this is looking like a no-deal leave, and that's what they're seeking to force on others.
No, it's not at all.
We won't do it.
The Prime Minister didn't deliver Brexit. That's why she's now
tried.
resigning and going.
She tried.
Because she
Our own
failed to
colleaagues
do it.
stopped her.
No, the Labour
Yes,
Party
they did.
stopped her.
The Labour Party didn't
Democrats
help.
stopped her.
Damn right
But
we stopped her.
let's be clear
Also,
that
the
that
Democratic Party of
deal
government.
was not Brexit. It wasn't what the country voted for. And that's why she didn't have the confidence of her own parliamentary
So Boris
party.
Johnson won't come back with that deal, will he? In any way,
Boris
shape or form?
Well, I think if you watch the debate and listen to what he said, he is very clear that he will achieve a deal with the European Union.
Explain to us, because we were confused listening to Boris Johnson. Jeremy Hunt accuses him of not having the detail in terms of the plan. Exactly what is the plan for a deal with the EU?
Well, I think Boris has been clear. So first of all, it's not more of the same. Jeremy Hunt is Theresa May 2.0 and more of the same, and it's now time for change, and the country wants
So you're
change.
ripping up that withdrawal agreement?
Boris has said it's dead. Absolutely. It's been defeated 3 times in Parliament.
So,
Of course it's
so
been.
what is the plan?
So what he has said is, look, the government got it wrong when it agreed to the sequencing of this negotiations from the very beginning.
Sure,
we
but
should never have offered money in the first instance without knowing what the future relationship was going to be. So he's taking that out, saying, once we know we're getting a good deal, then we can pay that.
But what is the good deal? Explain, because he talks about staying in the implementation period. How does that work?
So at the moment, well, what will happen is that he will disaggregate the withdrawal agreement. So let's deal with citizens' rights right now. That should never have been an issue for debate. That should have been sorted. Get a bill through Parliament now and guarantee the rights of EU citizens. 2, we cannot pay £39 billion when we don't know what the future trade relationship is going to be. And the third thing, which is really important, that we've been so focused on the issue of the backstop and the border in Northern Ireland, when we know that actually a lot of those issues are to do with future customs policy, border policy. That should never have been in this position where you're dealing with that before negotiating.
Yeah, but you still haven't explained. But what you haven't explained, we know that to some extent, Ross. What you haven't explained is Boris Johnson's suggestion that we stay in what we call the implementation period until a free trade agreement is agreed with the EU. Is that what you're proposing?
The point is that we will pass a withdrawal agreement to leave the European Union, and then during an implementation period, you obviously have that negotiation with the European Union on what your future trading relationship should be like. But Theresa May's not doing what Boris Johnson is doing. In fact, giving up £39 billion, not guaranteeing EU citizens' rights, and dealing with the Irish border issue at the beginning before dealing with a trading relationship was just wrong.
Look, I don't think this is going to be the first or the last time that we're all going to be confused by what Boris Johnson's saying. And the fact is, there are other actors here at play, like the European Union, who have been absolutely categorical that they are not opening that withdrawal agreement.
And so the question is, don't talk over each other.
We've got until October the 31st. You can't, if you want to stop the clock, I'm with you. That means revoking Article 50, stop the clock, and then if he wants to go back, no, it's not. If Parliament decides to do it, that's not undemocratic. And if we want to stop the clock and start again, which is actually what you kind of suggested, I'm with you. But that's not what's going to happen. We're going to end up in an impasse where, MPs who critically do not want no deal, and there's a lot of them on the Conservative benches, maybe you're happy with it, but certainly I know a lot who aren't, are going to have to make a decision. And that's when I think the only way through this is going to have to be a referendum, where we either ratify that agreement or we remain.
Alistair, the problem for Jeremy Hunt, as he tried to argue last night, is that he is a man of more detail and that he has better negotiating skills. But in of itself, there's no substance to how he will get a deal or, as Boris Johnson put to him, when he would actually leave. And so there is a potential, as far as Tory party members are, that this could go on. The hamster wheel of doom, as Boris Johnson called it, with Jeremy Hunt.
What Jeremy proposes is, by approaching the European Union on the basis that we have a common problem and a shared problem, it's the best way to deal with it. And we do. We know the EU don't want a no-deal situation. We know the Republic of Ireland doesn't want a no-deal situation. Jeremy set out last night what he planned to do in relation to the backstop and the Irish part of the agreement, and what he wants to do.
Technological solutions that, as he admitted, are not there yet.
Customs check, certified traders and
But they couldn't replace.
Solutions.
But they couldn't replace or protect the single market in the way the EU would like.
But what you can do, as he indicated, that by looking at the problem as a shared one, by working with colleagues who want to get an agreement, by not putting them in a situation where they would feel under such pressure to make a deal, it would put at risk the cohesion of the EU. It's a much better position for the European Union and for the UK to be in. So it's much more likely to create the deal. And then we can move forward.
Well, let's listen to Boris Johnson responding when he was asked whether he would resign if the UK didn't leave the EU on October the 31st.
If we go into these negotiations from the beginning with a plan to allow that deadline yet again to be fungible, to be a papier-mâché deadline, I'm afraid that the EU will not take us seriously. Nor will business understand that they must prepare for no deal.
Can we get some detail?
It's not do or die, is it?
Make it
it's Boris in number 10 that matters.
It's more important, isn't it, in terms of Boris Johnson, as he said there, Jeremy Hunt, that actually it's number 10 is more important than the future of the country?
No, not at all. Boris Johnson is standing this election because he cares deeply about the future of the country and wants to deliver Brexit, because so far the government has failed, and I believe he's the only man that can do it. And, you know, heaven forbid, you saw in that TV debate, he gets accused of being optimistic. My goodness me, we need some optimism. The last couple of
but
years...
optimism won't actually fix this on its own.
No, but he has a plan to fix it. But we need to inject some passion and enthusiasm and some self-belief in this country again.
But
and Boris Johnson can do that.
No,
Jeremy
we've
Hunt
all got
can't.
this. No.
He's the same. He is the same candidate. Boris Johnson gives you change. Jeremy Hunt, Theresa May 2.0, we can't afford to do that again.
This is a line that is just spun out by a campaign. Jeremy Hunt has offered detail as to how he will want to go forward. He's very optimistic about the future of the country. We can all be optimistic. We can all talk loudly and with passion about where Britain is going to go. But if it's not based on anything realistic, then it's a false promise. And what Jeremy Hunt has said, he's been very clear that if he can't see a deal coming forward by a particular date, he's as committed to preparing for no deal or anything else.
He won't leave. That's the thing. Jeremy Hunt won't rule out.
So you're saying October the 31st, no matter what, no matter what the risk to the country.
All right.
Well, so if November the 1st was a possibility, November the 2nd a possibility, you'd call it all off because of October the 31st.
31st of October, we have to leave Alistair.
No matter what the damage.
Pippa, has a new front in the battle being waged to prevent no deal? I mean, listening to this and the dates of October the 31st, would Jeremy Hunt go to Christmas? John Major now wading in, saying he will go to court if that is what happens, Parliament shut down in order to prevent no deal being stopped by MPs. Is this where the battle is? All over no deal?
I think the closer we get to October the 31st and the more evident it becomes to everyone that Boris Johnson's plans are not going to be accepted by Brussels, the more important it will be for MPs to try and stop no deal. And we've started to see the beginnings of some sort of quite creative ways in which by preventing prorogation of Parliament, MPs can make sure they're around to stop no deal and have a vote over the last few days. Now, I don't think that now's the moment. In the same way, I don't think that when Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister, there won't be a no-confidence vote led by Labour just before the summer recess, because they know that they need the sort of the momentum, the timing, the threat, the spectre of no deal looming over Parliament for MPs to actually be pushed at that final moment, and it possibly be days before, to actually do something about it. And I think they will do something about it as well.
No deal is not an end in itself. You've got to have a situation. I'm very committed to leaving. I make no bones about this. I'm very committed to leaving and leaving with a deal. Stopping a no deal, stopping a process isn't enough. That's why we have to be committed to achieving something. And that's where I think Jeremy Hunt scores over Boris Johnson, because he is, as I was, voted to remain, but is now committed to leaving, a plan to do so, and the engagement with the European Union to make sure it happens. Simply stopping things, the Labour Party can't make up its mind, the Remain position of the Lib Dems is clear, isn't enough. It won't help Britain going forward.
It is, because what we are offering is whatever this deal, in what form, with a tweak that Boris Johnson will say it's a brand new deal and actually it's a papered over deal. Fine, actually let it be. But that still doesn't have the votes, because that was proven the last time round. So unless you suddenly have the Tory party genuinely coming together over this, I actually don't think the votes are there. And, you know, Brecon and Radnisher's coming up. The majority is decreasing, potentially. So we are going to end up where we were before. And the only way out will be a ratification referendum with the option to remain.
If a skillful negotiation is done, I think the votes are there.
Well, so what will you do? What will you do if Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister and his government does get to the stage where no deal is now the default option? Would you back a no-confidence motion to stop it?
I find it very difficult to do that, simply because I think there is a great danger to the United Kingdom in a general election which would produce either a hung parliament or a possibility of a coalition led by Jeremy Corbyn that I think would do significant damage. I don't believe we'll get there.
Is there a way?
I'm backing Jeremy Hunt because
I understand that, but is there a way that you? But is there a way of preventing no deal, voting in a no confidence motion that doesn't bring Jeremy Corbyn?
Getting a deal. That's what does it. And if colleagues will realise the risks that they would take if they are presented with the opportunity of a deal, and I think Jeremy Hunt will be very determined to get something to bring to colleagues. If there is a greater risk from revoke, referendum, general election or anything else, rather than voting for an agreement and moving forward, I think colleagues might recognise, with all the effort that's been put in by a new Prime
All right.
Minister. Take the chance.
Let me have another go at it, because we've had Boris Johnson saying it's do or die. It's October the 31st. He is the front runner. He has the support for both shutting down Parliament from Tory grassroots, many of them, and pushing through the no deal. What are you going to do to stop it? What can you do?
I don't believe there is support in Parliament.
I'm talking about grassroots, which means he wins.
I appreciate he wins, but you can't do something in Parliament because of what the grassroots are simply saying.
But if the Prime Minister wants it,
you've got to have the votes in Parliament to do this. I'm very clear. I don't think either candidate would go through the constitutional difficulty of proroguing. I'd like to hear it from Boris Johnson. I think they are both committed to getting an agreement, and I think when they offer that to colleagues and colleagues see the dangers of not getting the agreement, I think there is a likelihood of going
But you think,
forward.
as you just said, Boris Johnson's going to win because of his support in the grassroots?
Well, I'm not conceded that at all. I'm simply saying if either wins, I think their first priority will be to get a deal. But I would like to hear Boris Johnson ruling out prorogation because he's not done so.
Let's move on to the diplomatic furore. Well, it's not very diplomatic, of course, over the future of Sir Kim Darroch, our man in Washington. Let's listen to this from the debate.
Would you like to keep him beyond Christmas when he normally retires?
Well, he's due to retire until Christmas, and I will certainly keep him until he's
After
due
Christmas.
to retire.
Right. OK.
I will
But
do that.
you keep
Now,
him
what about
beyond-
you, though? You've asked me the
Gentlemen,
question.
thank you.
It's interesting.
I think we want to know your
you're the
answer,
Foreign
Boris.
Secretary.
Mr Hunt,
You're
let
the Foreign
Mr
Secretary.
Johnson
I
answer.
think we'd all
You're
like
the
to hear
Foreign
your
Secretary.
answer.
So you're going to keep him into... You wouldn't keep him beyond... You wouldn't extend his term out of sympathy?
I will keep him until he's due to retire, and I think we'd like to know if you would.
Well, I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to...
Thank
that
you.
I'm going
Okay.
to be in a position
Let's go
to
back-
take that. But what I will say is that I and I alone will decide who takes important and politically sensitive jobs, such as the UK ambassador to the US.
He's thrown Sir Kim Darroch to the wolves, hasn't he?
Not at all. He was very clear that if he is Prime Minister, he and he alone will take decisions on who our ambassadors are, who represents us abroad, and that's absolutely right. So that's what he should do. It was very clear. He
was
just
asked, he was
stated
asked
that. He
6
was so clear.
times whether he would guarantee to keep Sir Kim Darroch in post, and he refused to answer it.
Why?
And Jeremy Hunt
this
was
is a-
clear about it. Number 10 had been clear about it. The Prime Minister will be appearing at Prime Minister's questions shortly, and I'm sure she'll be clear about it. Why he's not been clear about it is because he's clearly decided it's more important for him, a Boris Johnson administration, to quite frankly be in the lap of Donald Trump and to maintain that relationship rather than standing up for the country and standing up for one of our top civil servants.
Part of standing up for the country is actually having the best possible relationship with the United States, our biggest
You can
trading
do
partner
that, and
and
you can have an
investor
adult
is the
grown-up
United States.
relationship
Yes.
with the United States while at the same time saying that you are maintaining your right and your responsibility to defend one of your top civil servants who can't speak out for themselves. He didn't say that.
he didn't
He,
say
as the
that,
Prime
Ross.
Minister, is the person who will make the decision on who our ambassadors are, who represents
Does he
us
back
abroad.
Kim Darroch staying in post?
Well, I think you saw quite clearly in that debate that he said, as Prime Minister, he will decide who represents
That's not the
us
answer to the question, Ross.
abroad. Well, that's up to
come
the
on.
Foreign
No,
Secretary
my
and the Prime
question to you
Minister.
is:
That's not
will
to
he
me or
keep?
Boris
Will
Johnson.
he
That's up to the
keep?
Foreign
Will he
Secretary.
keep the ambassador in Washington in post until he steps down?
Well, that's a decision for Jeremy Hunt and the Prime Minister. That's not a decision of Boris Johnson.
If Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister, will Sir Kim Darroch stay in post?
That's a question you have to ask Boris Johnson.
They
Not Jeremy
tried.
Hunt.
16 We're asking.
And, no, but he was quite clear that he,
No.
as Prime Minister, will be the person that said no one else will decide who our ambassadors are, who represents us abroad.
Ross making the best effort here, but it's very clear. Boris Johnson was asked a question about the situation now. An ambassador under attack, and under extraordinary attack from the leading politician in the country where he is serving, where the President of the United States. I don't care.
You don't care?
It's the elected leader of any country, and our
most important
ambassador,
ally in the United States.
Our ambassador has the responsibility to report honestly, which he has done. It doesn't matter who the ruler is. But what you're saying is because of the relationship with the United States, it is giving an effective veto to the President of the United States. And Boris Johnson had an opportunity to say, no, he won't do that. And the signal would have gone out to everyone who works for us abroad, all these hard-working people all over the world. If you fall into trouble, you won't have your back protected by the Foreign Secretary.
Office right now because of that.
Oh,
leak.
really?
That is.
Well, that's
Well,
interesting.
so hang on. Why can't you
altogether.
trust the Foreign Office?
How do you know the Foreign Office did the leak?
Hang on.
Alistair, come on, there has been a serious...
You know, do you know?
Well, no, I've seen the newspapers just like you have, and I make my judgment based on those. But come on, there has been a serious leak
Who's it
in
benefited?
government, and that is not
Who
good.
has the leak
Well, that is
benefited?
not good for the United Kingdom. That is not good for standing
Alistair,
abroad. That is
what's
not
not
good
good-
for trust in the
what's not good for
relationship.
the-
And actually, we should be looking and focusing on that, Alistair.
What's-
This person needs to be brought to task and should face charges for what they have
Yes,
done.
well,
And I'm
that's
sure we can
been-
all agree on that.
We can all agree on that. But what we don't seem to be able to agree on is that our ambassador in difficulty for doing his job deserves the backing of the administration in the United Kingdom, the backing of the Prime Minister, the backing of the Foreign Secretary, and the backing of
And I
those who
believe
would
he's got that.
seek to be Prime Minister. And that did not happen.
But Alistair, there is a question. You said you don't care.
I don't care who the individual
no,
is.
I
The ambassador's position
understand that, but you don't
should
care.
be
But do
protected.
you? How much
I do care
value
about
do
the
you
relationship.
place on the relationship
huge.
with the United
Very
States?
important.
And Boris Johnson said that this is a politically sensitive appointment, and we'll come to Ross with his response to that. But politically sensitive because in a post-Brexit world, the UK wants to do a free trade agreement with the United States. We're going to need to work with Donald Trump. So can you understand the cautiousness, perhaps, that Boris Johnson was responding to those questions about Kim Darroch?
I can understand the need for a very good relationship with the United States, which is very broad and very deep. And that relationship has been put under pressure, firstly by the leak, and Ross is absolutely right, the leak has been terrible, but secondly by the way in which the President has responded to that leak and has sought to put pressure on the Ambassador and therefore on the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary to question his position and his acceptability. That, I think, is not right. What the United Kingdom should be clear about is that the Ambassador has the full authority of the United Kingdom, is supported, and that is the basis of a future relationship with the United States. We choose our ambassadors, they choose theirs. They've all got a responsibility of honesty, and that's how the relationship
All right,
best
Ross.
works, whether it's future trade relationship or security or anything else.
If it is politically sensitive, the role of who is the ambassador in Washington, should it be a more political appointment in the future?
I wouldn't want to politicise those who are meant to be representing us abroad. I don't think that's right, and that, I don't think we should go down the US model where political appointees are made ambassadors.
That's
I don't
right.
think that would be very helpful at all. But we do have to make sure, and Alistair's right, I mean, Alistair was a great diplomat in the Foreign Office, so Alistair knows exactly how it works, and you do have to have that free and accessible information and honest information from your ambassadors. But I do think that what has happened is obviously going to affect the trust and the relationship we have with the US, right?
But I do think it's made it worse. And I've been to Washington and I've met with Sir Kim, Public Accounts Committee went out there. We also spoke to the negotiators in America about what the shape of the deal and all sorts is going to look like. And actually the relationship that he had and his team had with the Trump administration was actually a very good working relationship.
Very good.
And the nature of those cables, and I grew up in a diplomatic family for the whole of my life, it is entirely right that the ambassador is able to speak openly, frankly, with back home, so that we here can make a proper assessment of what Trump's like. For him to be describing Trump in terms that, frankly, are far less than what we say here doesn't surprise me at all. But it's made it worse that Boris Johnson has not said he would keep him, that he hasn't given him his full backing as the front runner, because actually that has fueled Trump to want to go after the blood. And I think all we need now is for Boris Johnson to say, we'd keep him, draw a line under it, and they can rebuild that relationship.
It doesn't look as if he's going to do that. Instead, playing up the strong relationship that he has with the White House, which will be important.
Because of his core support right now, which is the Tory grassroots, what they care about is a free trade deal with the US, and you need Trump on side on that. And I don't think this actually will have any impact on the outcome of the leadership contest, and I think Boris Johnson knows that.
Pippa, thank you very much for being here, and the same to you, Ross. The two of you are staying here in the studio. We're going to talk about Labour and the issue of anti-Semitism. Let's welcome Wes Streeting, Labour MP. Wes, the peers Lord Turnberg, Lord Darzai and Lord David Treisman have resigned the Labour whip over anti-Semitism. What's your response?
To be honest, I'm absolutely gutted. I mean, I know David Treisman very well, worked with him when he was Minister for Students in the last Labour government. He's a former General Secretary of the Labour Party. The two peers who've left alongside him are both distinguished, both in their own fields, but also their contribution to the Labour benches in the House of Lords. And I just wonder how much it will take, how much more it will take, how many more resignations it will take for Labour's leadership to finally take the issue of anti-Semitism seriously. You know, this evening Panorama have a documentary airing. I don't know what's in it. I don't know if it's any good because I haven't seen it. And yet what we've got is a full spin operation sanctioned by the Labour leadership in operation trying to discredit and delegitimise a programme they haven't seen. I don't need a Panorama documentary to tell me about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I've lived through this issue in the last 4 years. The poor administration of cases, the overly lenient decisions made in cases that have been seen, the degree of political interference in cases, and the mealy-mouthed responses to concerns from people right across the Jewish community, including leading Jewish representative bodies. And then to add insult to injury, the attempt to discredit and smear people who raise concerns about anti-Semitism. It's all a smear, they say. I think this is, you know, absolutely a terrible place for the Labour Party to be in. We are subject to an EHRC investigation. We're only the second political party in British history to be subject to such an investigation into institutional racism.
Well, people
the
may
first
listen
was
to you.
the first was the BNP.
Wes, I hear you. People may listen to you and hear everything that you have said about your own party. Why are you still there?
Because I haven't given up on the Labour Party, its 100-year history, the fact that I've got plenty of people in the Parliamentary Labour Party, within my own constituency Labour Party and beyond, who are prepared to wrestle the Labour Party back in terms of its commitment to equality in sincere forms. And I have to say to people in and around the leadership of the Labour Party, particularly those who I think do recognise that there's a problem, what actually are you going to do? It's all very well people like me appearing on programmes like yours, whilst Corbynistas swamp my timeline saying, well, he would say that, he's not a fan of Jeremy Corbyn. I'd like to know what those decent members of the Shadow Cabinet are going to say about this. I'd like to know what decent members of the Parliamentary Party are going to say about it.
What do you say then when the Labour Party has just put out a statement saying it completely rejects what it calls the offensive and false claims made by the three peers who have resigned the Labour whip?
I mean, what can you say to that? I think it's contemptuous, actually. And here's a test, actually, for members of the Shadow Cabinet who do broadcast today, and for Jeremy Corbyn in particular. If the Labour Party is genuinely serious about tackling anti-Semitism, if it believes it has nothing to hide, why won't it cancel immediately the obligations under non-disclosure agreements it's imposed on former members of the compliance unit who've dealt in depth with anti-Semitism cases, remove those gagging orders, set them free to speak publicly and truthfully about their experience? Will they do that, or is it actually the case that there's something rotten in the state of Denmark?
All right. Wes, stay with us. I want to welcome into the studio, I should say, Andy MacDonald, who's Shadow Transport, and Camilla Tominey from The Telegraph. Andy MacDonald, listening to Wes Streeting, the Panorama programme that he's talking about by the BBC poses the question, is Labour anti-Semitic? Is it an anti-Semitic party? The answer from Lord Treesman and the two other peers is, yes, it is.
Well, the answer from me is no, it is not. People come into the Labour Party to fight discrimination and racism. There is an issue of anti-Semitism abroad in our society, and it does rear its head in the Labour Party in a very, very small number of cases.
But it does more than rear its head. If you've got people leaving, like the three peers we've talked about, you've had a string of MPs leave the party, partly because of anti-Semitism that they say is absolutely rife. This issue has gone on for 3 years. You failed to deal with it. Is it, as Tony Blair says, that you just can't see anti-Semitism because you don't know what it is?
Oh, no, I totally and utterly reject that. I also reject the most heinous allegation put at the door of Jeremy Corbyn that he is anti-Semitic.
Why is it heinous?
Because Jeremy has devoted his entire life to fighting racism and standing up against anti-Semitism.
But does he know what anti-Semitism is? As Tony Blair said, Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite who doesn't know that he is one. Some of the remarks are not explicable in any other way, I'm afraid, and that is sad.
He must be specific about that. He must back that up. And so what is it that Jeremy Corbyn has said that is anti-Semitic or shows no understanding of it? He's reinforced his position, which has been echoed in the EDMs that he signed, resisting anti-Semitism anti-Semitism through time, with articles, with videos, with letters to members, to initiating a process within the Labour Party, instructing Jenny Formby to make great progress.
And
with
yet
this
it is
issue.
still
And
happening.
she has
Why?
speeded up the process.
Why is it?
She has speeded up the process fourfold since she came into office. We've doubled the size of the staff. We've increased the number of panels which have independent counsel who sit with them. So there's a great deal that has been done. A great deal more has to be done. But the charge of anti-Semitism, I wholeheartedly reject.
Do you think you need outside help, though? Do you think you need outside help as a Labour Party? If you fail to deal with it, which you say you have, you say it's a small number of cases, is it time to solicit outside help? You've already got the Equalities Commission investigating the party. It's only the second time they've done that with a political party. Is it time to say, we can't deal with it, we failed,
well,
we need help?
EHRC are engaged, and let's have them look at these processes, and if we can get their guidance to improve further, I welcome that, and I want to embrace that.
Let me pick up Wes Streeting's point, because he said if you are genuinely committed to rooting out anti-Semitism and admitting the breadth of the problem, as so many of your members and members of Parliament and peers see it, why is it that some of the people who've spoken out in the Panorama programme, they've broken non-disclosure agreements to speak out, why are they facing potential legal action?
Well, what do the non-disclosure agreements cover?
Well, they cover... You have said yourselves that you want to get rid of NDAs, legislating to prevent making any contractual clauses which stop disclosure of future discrimination, harassment or victimisation.
Indeed.
Labour's policy is to stop that. These people are speaking out about discrimination.
That is my point entirely. No, they're talking about breaches of data. That is why people are being questioned. It's nothing to do... If anyone wants to speak about improper conduct, harassment or bullying, do it.
So non-disclosure agreements, let's be clear, the Labour Party is against non-disclosure agreement. It's going to legislate against them. But there are some NDAs that are OK, particularly if they are...
You're misinterpreting.
No, I'm not misinterpreting.
Let me clarify it for you then, because the non-disclosure agreements we're talking about, which seek to ban people from speaking out, from whistleblowers, that is completely
But that's what these people are doing. They are speaking out about what they've seen within the Labour Party.
No, that is not true.
How do you know?
Because...
How do you know what they're speaking about?
Because I know the issues that are at large in this case.
No.
I've informed myself.
Have you seen the Panorama programme? Do you know what they're speaking out about?
Well, let me just give you some clues as to what I suspect is going to be in there. And I'm telling you that we do not disclose... We are not against people whistleblowing. That's the exact opposite.
But that's what these people are.
When they breach GDPR and they part with data illegally, we're duty-bound, because some of those people who've been named in those disclosures are seeking legal action against the party for that breach of that legislation. So it's perfectly proper. And
are you against non-disclosure agreements, or aren't you?
Well, I've just told you, Joe, that
so you are. So why are you, and why have you, signed up lawyers, Carter Ruck? We can show our viewers and our guests the letter from Carter Ruck lawyers where they threaten people, former employees, including the ones who have spoken to the BBC Panorama programme, saying you are subject to an enduring obligation to keep confidential all confidential information. The whole point about being a whistleblower is that you breach your non-disclosure agreement in order for the public interest to speak about what's truly going on at the heart of this of the Labour Party.
Let me respond to you, because the substance of the Carter Ruck letter has got nothing to do with this Panorama programme. It goes back to April. It's about breach of GDPR, parting with people's data.
So nobody who's spoken to the Panorama programme is going to face any legal action?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
Right. No one's going to face any legal action for breaching their non-disclosure agreements with the Labour Party. So on the one hand, you're against them, except when it comes to protecting the Labour Party.
Now, that's an absolute
deliberate
misinterpretation.
No, it's not, because you've just said you're against non-disclosure agreements, and now you're saying except if it's protecting information within the Labour Party.
And all of us around this table know it's perfectly proper in contracts of employment where you must protect the data that you come into contact with, which is private and confidential. People don't consent to that being published. It's a wholly different matter if you are exposed to and understand that there's been issues of abuse or discrimination. We want to enable people to come forward with those allegations and be treated seriously and objectively.
Wes Streeting, does that reassure you in terms of the differences between the support to get rid of non-disclosure agreements, but not in this case?
No, I didn't find anything at all reassuring about that appearance, and I really think that actually people I think are decent people around the shadow cabinet are being put forward as fall guys for something that is just simply indefensible. The fact is the Labour Party could make it very clear that whistleblowing on anti-Semitism has got the green light. The good news is that people can whistleblow to the EHRC process. They can compel the Labour Party, current and former employees, to disclose all sorts of information pertinent to this investigation. And I really believe that they should. I'm just uncharacteristically lost for words, actually, about the response of the Labour Party and its leadership to what's happening, what we've just heard from Andy, what we hear from too many decent-minded people who generally have good consciences on this issue. What we've heard in the last 4 years has been completely appalling and unconscionable, and I do think we have to ask some hard questions about what it is about Jeremy Corbyn's politics and style of leadership that has created conditions in which anti-Semitism has been allowed to fester.
I can assure Wes that they're all decent people who are sitting around the shadow cabinet table, and they come to this in a spirit of real seriousness and a determination to root out anti-Semitism and resolve this issue. And that is our focus, that's our intention, and we shall never shift from it. And I just wish that that could be acknowledged at times and that everybody coalesces around that objective, as I know everybody wants to do, rather than being deflected by some of these ancillary matters that, quite frankly, are not helping us.
Wes Streeting, thank you very much for joining us. Are you worried about the BBC Panorama programme tonight?
Don't know. We'll see what it says. Are
you worried about what it might say or not?
Well, I'm worried about its objectivity because the journalist concerned has got form. And he's written articles which have been scurrilous in his attack upon Jeremy Corbyn over the years. He's got other articles.
So it's the media's fault.
Yeah, what was the one he did with
is it the media's fault? I'm going to welcome in Laura Kunsberg, BBC's political editor.
It's a huge issue, and objectivity and impartiality are critically important.
Of course, and he's not here to defend himself, and he would stand up for himself.
Corbyn's response to this is going to be a big test of his leadership. And I will find it extraordinary if we don't get to tomorrow and there are hosts of people calling for him to go.
All right, we're going to move on to Labour's Brexit position. We're just hearing news that Sir Kim Darroch has resigned. Now, we've discussed this in full earlier on in the programme. That has obviously just come to our attention. What's your response?
Well, that is what I was about to say. I thought was about to happen or had just happened, and I would just say also I haven't seen official confirmation of that yet, so let's just take a breath and see exactly how that news has emerged and from where, crucially. I think we understand that is what's going on. I think the last 48 hours have put him in an increasingly untenable situation, but it is a remarkable event nonetheless, and you can't just explain this away by saying, oh, well, it all got terribly difficult. Sir Kim Darroch, whether people like him or not, whether they agree with him or not, he is somebody who, over the years, has been one of the most respected UK independent diplomats acting on the country's behalf, officially, of course, acting on Her Majesty's behalf, not, somebody who is a political appointee, which is completely different to how other countries run it. And for him to be forced out early by being dragged into a political row that was started by a leak stirred up by the American president and then discussed by the two candidates who will be, one of whom will be Prime Minister in a fortnight's time, when one of them ostensibly failed to back him, is a major, major event in this country. Well, and we, traditionally we've had a real separation between politics and diplomacy.
Well, this has come from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, so it has been confirmed. And the quote from Sir Kim Darroch: "Since the leak of official documents from this embassy, there has been a great deal of speculation surrounding my position and the duration of my remaining term as ambassador. I want to put an end to that speculation. The current situation is making it impossible for me to carry out my role as I would like." Your response?
I think that says a huge amount about the man who has recognised the difficulty of the situation. He's taken it upon himself. He was rightly backed by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, but plainly the intervention of the President of the United States, the way in which he has done it, has given a man of great honour and principle the sense that in order for the United Kingdom to further its relationship properly with the United States, he can't be there. I think that speaks volumes about so many of the people involved in this. I know Kim Darroch, he's been a friend for a long time in his diplomatic posts. I think this is a very, very sad moment for the United Kingdom. And the person who emerges with honour from this is Kim Darroch.
Boris Johnson couldn't quite bring himself to give him full support yesterday in the debate.
Well, I think there was the notion that if Boris Johnson does become the next Prime Minister, as is suggested he will, that he wouldn't have kept him in place anyway, or he would have waited for him to retire, I think, after Christmas. So, as Alistair has said here, he's been the ultimate diplomat, really, because he has helped the government avoid any allegation that they are in some way Trump's poodle by acting on his Twitter outrage rather than protecting their own man in Washington.
In terms, though, of the relationship, the future relationship between whoever becomes Prime Minister and the United States and the President, what does this do to that?
Well, I think it's very serious, Joe, because if there was a hostile leak, you know, great scoop for a journalist, but a hostile leak against one of our most senior diplomats, that was then stirred up by President Trump. And to many people, it would just seem that Trump had a tantrum and then the UK then was forced to act in response. Now, late on Tuesday night, at the moment there's so much news around,
yes,
what day of the week it is.
It's Wednesday. I know, we have to check.
Late on Monday night, in fact, a very senior member of the government said to me, there is no way that we would ever move away from the convention of us picking our own representatives around the world. We will not let it happen that another country chooses who represents our country abroad. Now, that's a fundamental principle. This affair suggests that maybe that principle might not be adhered to in future. And that's a very serious, you know, it's one thing to say, well, all the conventions have gone out of the window. This is a really serious convention.
Well, and Boris Johnson...
If the leaking has led to this, other people will be watching. Who is the next ambassador who might be put at risk with a malicious leak if they know that the British government is not going to back them up? The Foreign Secretary was absolutely right to back him to the hilt, and I wish that course had been followed by
Andy?
others.
Yeah, I think Alice's absolutely right. Tim Darroch has done the honourable thing, and and he does speak to his character. What has happened is the President of the United States has dictated who our ambassador is, and that really should worry us all.
Worrying.
And where does this end? We've got a brilliant diplomatic service. Alice knows this better than I do, but we're so proud of what they do for us and the way that they function. For them to be undermined in this way, I think, is a really dangerous step.
Right. What we're beginning to see, and I hope I'm wrong, is what Boris Johnson as Prime Minister could bring, which is by kowtowing to people like Trump and not backing Kim Darroch in the way that he should have done. I think that left open the door for why we've descended into the situation we are now. He did it with Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. We've got another now in Kim Darroch.
Well,
who else is coming?
I'll ask Camilla that in a moment if we have time before Prime Minister's questions. A practical question, though, Laura. Does Theresa May appoint the next ambassador? Because there is a hiatus and this is an important post.
Well, there is, and I think the answer is we just don't know yet. I mean, I would imagine that she would wait. I mean, if he's saying he's resigned, it's unlikely that he would pack his bags from the ambassador's mansion in Washington and be out tomorrow with Pickfords arriving this afternoon.
I think the sense would be, I mean, clearly it's a most important post. In any circumstances, it would be a matter of long consideration about who would be appropriate. I don't think the wheels could possibly move that quickly, and it probably wouldn't be right to do so. There'll be a perfectly effective deputy
Although
head
to
of
just
mission.
adds a little bit of drama to the proceedings.
What, like there isn't enough?
Well, let's add some more, because it had been mooted that Sir Mark Sedwill was being lined up for that role.
Yes.
He has courted criticism because of his dual role that he acts as Chief
Cabinet
Civil
Secretary,
Servant, Cabinet Secretary, and also National Security Advisor, not particularly popular with some swathes of the Tory party. Equally, I understand journalistically more revelations are planning to be forthcoming in the Mail on Sunday, which could have also made up Sir Kim Darroch's mind.
Ah, well, that's interesting. You can't tell us any more?
No. Well, I don't work for the Mail on Sunday, but I imagine there's a part two because any good journalist has one.
Well, we'll leave that hanging over to Prime Minister's questions. Here we are.
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I have spoken to Sir Kim Darroch. I have told him that it is a matter of great regret that he has felt it necessary to leave his position as ambassador in Washington. The whole Cabinet rightly gave its full support to Sir Kim on Tuesday. Sir Kim has given a lifetime of service to the United Kingdom, and we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. Good government depends on public servants being able to give full and frank advice. I want all our public servants to have the confidence to be able to do that. And I hope the House will reflect on the importance of defending our values and principles, particularly when they are under pressure. Mr. Speaker, the whole House will want to join me in sending our deepest sympathies to the family and friends of Tammy Minshall, the student paramedic who was killed in a traffic accident last week whilst on duty. This is a reminder of the members of all our emergency services who risk their lives each day on our behalf. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Alex Sobel. I'd first like to associate myself with the comments regarding the tragic accident last week. I am pleased to see the Prime Minister is wearing green. I hope it is not merely a green wash, as I welcome the fact the government legislated for net zero by 2050. But before they did, when their targets were weaker, the Committee for Climate Change already reported they were going to miss their target. And today, they said that the policy ambition implementation now fall well short of what is required. Targets helpful, but what we need is policies that actually deliver. Clearly, the Prime Minister wants to leave a climate legacy, so will she bring forward the ban on diesel and petrol cars from 2040 to 2030 or earlier? And when will she end her government's opposition to cheap onshore wind power? Prime Minister.
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that, in fact, we have an excellent record in relation to our dealing with climate change. As a government, we have outperformed on our first and second carbon budgets from 2008 to 2017. We're on track to meet the third, and the latest projections suggest we're on track to deliver over 90% of our required performance for the fourth and fifth carbon budgets. And we are the first major economy to legislate for net zero emissions by 2050. The UK is leading the world on climate change. I want to see other countries following our example.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North Staffordshire used to have one of the most extensive rail networks in the world, but now often people in Stoke-on-Trent have to rely on their cars. Would the Prime Minister join me in my petition to reopen Mere Station in my constituency as the next step to improving our local transport?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I know he's been campaigning on this issue for some time. I know he's met ministers to discuss this. I understand that this is in an area that's about to benefit from refurbished modern trains on the Crewe to Derby line from December of this year as part of the new East Midlands Railway franchise. In relation to the station at Mere, the Department for Transport will have heard my honourable friend's call to reopen the station, and I know that he will continue to campaign on behalf of all his constituents.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too regret the resignation of Sir Kim Darroch. I think the comments made about him are beyond unfair and wrong. I think he's given honourable and good service, and he should be thanked for it. And I think the whole House should join together in deeply regretting the feeling that he's obviously got that he must resign at this moment. I also join the Prime Minister in passing condolences to the family of Tammy Winchell, who died as part of our emergency services, giving service to people. Mr. Speaker, many people welcomed the powerful points the Prime Minister made when she was first appointed about burning injustices in Britain. Does she agree with me that access to justice is vital in order to tackle burning injustices?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that there are many burning injustices that can be tackled in a variety of ways, and that is the action that I have taken, not just as Prime Minister, but also as Home Secretary. And I'll give him one example: the race disparity audit, which shines a light on inequality in public services. A race disparity audit which shines a light on inequality in public services and is enabling us to put into place action that helps to ensure that people across this country, whatever their background, will ensure that they have access to the public services they need.
Mr. Speaker, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the Legal Aid and Advice Act. That act, introduced by the post-war Labour government, gave all people access to justice, not just the rich, and was an essential pillar of a welfare state and a decent society. The Tory Lib Dem coalition slashed legal aid in 2013, and the results are clearly very unfair. The number of law centres and other not-for-profit legal aid providers has more than halved. There are now legal aid deserts across the whole country. Does the Prime Minister think that has helped or hindered the fight against burning injustices?
Prime Minister. The point that I was making to the right honourable gentleman, and that he seems to fail to recognise, is that the whole question of burning injustices is not about just access to the legal system. The question of dealing with burning... It's all very well members of the opposition benches from shouting about this. If the Labour Party actually really cared about burning injustices, they'd have done a darn sight more when they were in power to deal with them.
Mr. Speaker, some people have very short memories. It was the Tory... It's all right, it's okay. It's all right, it's okay. The Tory Lib Dem coalition cut legal aid, but also brought in fees for employment tribunals. The then Minister for Employment Relations, the Honourable Member for East Dunbartonshire, piloted that through the House. But since that time, my union, Unison, took the government to court and won, and as a result, employment fees were cancelled. The cuts to legal aid affect people, Mr. Speaker, like Marcus. Like Marcus, a 71-year-old on pension credit, a leaseholder who is threatened with being evicted. And he says, and I quote, "I've paid taxes and national insurance all my life. How is it right that I'm being bullied and threatened with homelessness? The state won't protect me." And he goes on to say, "I've been working to 2 a.m. every night for the past 6 months, collecting evidence. I've got no idea if I've prepared my evidence correctly." Doesn't Marcus, trying to save his own home, deserve legal aid to get proper representation in a court and be fairly heard?
The Prime Minister. The right honourable gentleman. Obviously, I recognise the concerns that Marcus has about taking his case. But the right honourable gentleman might reflect on the fact that a quarter of the Ministry of Justice's budget is spent on legal aid. We spent £1.6 billion on legal aid last year. We're committing to ensuring that people can access the help they need into the future. But that is only one part of the picture. We've published a plan for legal support to maintain and improve access to support for those in need. And we're conducting a fundamental review of criminal legal aid fee schemes, which will consider criminal legal aid throughout the life cycle of a criminal case. So there are aspects of this issue that we are indeed looking at. But I think it is important that we ensure that we are careful with the provisions that we make for legal aid. And as I say, a quarter of the Ministry of Justice budget is spent on legal aid.
Jeremy Corbyn. Mr. Speaker, just so everyone's aware of it, Labour is committed to restoring legal aid funding for family law, for housing, for benefit appeals, for judicial review preparation, for inquests and real action on immigration cases. And as we announced yesterday, we will end the leasehold scandal. The Department of Work and Pensions is failing disabled people. The Ministry of Justice spent tens of millions of pounds each year defending appeals, over 2/3 of which were won by the claimants. Rather than spending millions defending incorrect and often immoral decisions, wouldn't that money have been better used increasing poverty-level benefits and providing legal aid to disabled people wrongly denied their basic dignity?
Minister. I'm not going to take any lectures from the right honourable gentleman on what this government has done for disabled people. We are committed to tackling the injustices that are facing disabled people, so everyone can go as far as their talents will take them. Our spending on support for disabled people and people with health conditions is at a record high. We are seeing many more people, over 900,000 more disabled people in work as a result of what this government has done. But if the right honourable gentleman is really interested in tackling injustices, then the biggest injustice he should tackle is in his own Labour Party and deal with anti-Semitism.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, my party is totally committed to eliminating racism in any form, anti-Semitism in any form. And while she is about the lecturing, how about the investigation into Islamophobia in her own party?
Order! Order! Mr. Bowie, you are as noisy as your illustrious late namesake David Bowie, but sadly nothing like as melodic, my dear chap. Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, one lecture she might not want to take from me, but she might care to listen to what the United Nations said when they, and I quote, condemned the UK government for its grave and systematic violations of the rights of disabled people. The Windrush scandal has resulted in the government having to allocate £200 million in compensation to people wrongly deported from this country, denied services and their lives totally pulled apart. People have given their life to this country and our services. Does the Prime Minister think that scandal would have happened if legal aid had not been slashed by the government, so many of those people were denied any representation in court?
Well, the right honourable gentleman
Prime Minister.
really needs to think rather more carefully about his arguments. Let's look about the issue of people in the Windrush generation. I've apologised for what happened to people in the Windrush generation. I've been very clear that they are British, they are here, they have a right to be here, and these should not have happened. We've apologised for the mistakes that have been made. But he raises issues about people who were incorrectly deported. The initial historical review has found that there were around 11,800 detentions and removals, which they looked at. They identified 18 people who were most likely to have been wrongly deported or removed. Of those, 6 were removed or detained under the last Labour government. And I say to the right honourable gentleman, the way he talks, you would think he was a man of principle. But what do we actually see from him? Labour policy is to ban non-disclosure agreements, but his staff have to sign them. He was an anti-racist, now he ignores anti-Semitism. He's been a Eurosceptic all his life, now he backs Remain. He's truly living up to the words of Marx. Those are my principles, and if you don't like them, I've got others. The honourable gentleman's keen to get to the dispatch box when the name Marx is identified. I was merely going to point out to him those were the words not of Karl, but of Groucho.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Coming from the Prime Minister who created the hostile environment which brought about the Windrush scandal, who ordered go-home vans to drive around London, who refuses to acknowledge Islamophobia in her own party, and whose party consorts with racists and anti-Semites in the European Parliament and sucks up to those governments across Europe. We don't need those kind of lectures. One legal aid firm, Mr. Speaker, one legal aid firm said, we see more people more desperate and in more extreme need than they were 5 years ago. There is nowhere to send them. Those people are invisible to the system. This is a denial of people's basic rights. The UN says legal aid cuts have overwhelmingly affected the poor and people with disabilities. Without equal access to justice, there is no justice. Today, in modern Britain, millions are denied justice because they don't have the money. Isn't that a disgrace? Isn't that a burning injustice?
Prime Minister! Right, honourable gentleman. He may do his best to ignore the anti-Semitism in his party, but I think he should listen. I think he should listen to the words of the former Labour Party General Secretary, the noble Lord Treesman, who said, "We may one day be the party of anti-racism once again, but it certainly isn't today." He has asked questions about injustice. Let me tell him about an injustice. It's an injustice when you force people who are working hard day and night to earn an income for their family to pay more taxes because of a Labour Party economic policy in government that has led to the destruction of our economy. What do we see from the Labour Party? You earn more, they want you to pay more tax. You buy a home, they want you to pay more tax. You want to leave something to your children, they want you to pay more tax. Labour's £9 billion family tax. Labour used to have a slogan of education, education, education. Now it's just tax, 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 injustice, injustice.
Prime Minister, I am a unionist with every fibre of my being, and that's why I was so aghast to hear Nicola Sturgeon's colleagues wishing to railroad through an independence referendum without a Section 30 order, at a time when public services in Scotland are mismanaged and need that desperate resource, an economy that has stagnated and continually pursuing policies that cut off the circulation of our United Kingdom at Berwick, and not because they're in the interests of Scotland. So will the Prime Minister join with me to condemn this illegal referendum approach and push the SNP to prioritise the areas that are actually in the interests of the people of Scotland?
Well, can I say, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The SNP promised people in Scotland in 2014 that the independence referendum was a once-in-a-generation vote. Now they're laying the foundation for another vote in just 18 months' time. The SNP often claim, they stand up and claim it here in this House, that Scotland is being ignored. It's being ignored by an SNP government obsessed with another referendum against the wishes of a clear majority of Scots. People, I agree with my honourable friend, people in Scotland want a Scottish government that focuses on improving their schools, on improving their health service, on improving their economy, not one that's obsessed by separation.
Ian Blackford!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say, every time the Prime Minister speaks in Scotland, our vote goes up. Mr. Speaker, today is Srebrenica Memorial Day, and I trust that everyone in this House will want to recognise the unbelievable sacrifice that so many faced. Yesterday I met some of the survivors of genocide, and we must do all we can to make sure that we call out the genocide deniers, that we learn the lessons from man's inhumanity to man that we witnessed in the continent of Europe, and never again should this happen in Europe or anywhere else. Can I join with the Prime Minister in her words to Kim Darroch? And it's a pity that the former Foreign Secretary, the candidate for leadership in the Tory party, did not stand up for our leading diplomat in the United States yesterday. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, can I also pay tribute to Winnie Ewing, who has her 90th birthday today, the only parliamentarian to sit in this House, in the Scottish Parliament and in the European Parliament. We remember the words of Winnie, "Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on." Mr. Speaker, Mark Carney has said that the UK economy does not appear to be growing. Danny Blanchflower, one of the few to predict the financial crisis in 2008, has said the early evidence suggests that the UK is already in recession. Mr Speaker, the dark clouds of Brexit are with us. Will the Prime Minister continue to ignore all the warning signs of recession?
Minister!
First of all, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, in relation to Srebrenica, I absolutely agree with him. We all must, we hope every time we see a massacre of this sort, we hope that humanity will learn from it. Sadly, all too often we see that is not the case. I was at the Western Balkans Summit last Friday in Poland, working with the countries of the Western Balkans, encouraging them and working with them to find peaceful ways of working together so that we can ensure that those countries see political stability and prosperity for their people in the future. The right honourable gentleman then talks about the state of the UK economy. Well, I'm very pleased to see that we actually have the best record in the G7 in terms of growth. We have the longest quarterly period of growth of any of the countries in the G7. We also, I have to say, to the right honourable gentleman, we have record numbers of people in employment, a record low in unemployment, and investment in our economy. This is an economy that is doing well, but it could really take off, and it would have done if the right honourable gentleman had actually voted for Brexit and voted for the deal we put for this House.
Ian Blackford!
Mr Speaker, perhaps we can look at the facts. Record food bank use. Ernst & Young tell us that the Brexit bill so far for financial services companies alone is as much as £4 billion. Foreign investment projects into the UK have dropped 14%, the lowest level in 6 years. Car production fell 15.5% in May, the 12th straight month of decline. UK retail sales have experienced their worst June on record. The near stagnation of the services sector in June is one of the worst performances seen over the past decade. We have the evidence, Prime Minister. Your legacy will be driving the UK economy over the cliff into another recession. Hasn't this Prime Minister sacrificed the jobs and livelihoods of people across the UK in order to please her Brexiteer backbenchers? Take no deal off the table and take positive action to restore confidence in the economy. The blame for any recession will lie at the door of this Brexit-obsessed government that is incapable of doing the D job.
Minister! Well, the right honourable gentleman talks about the car industry. I'm sorry that in referencing a car industry, he didn't reference the fact that in the last week we've seen the announcement by Jaguar Land Rover that they're going to manufacture electric vehicles in Castle Bromwich, preserving 2,700 jobs at the plant. We've also seen BMW announce they're going to manufacture the electric Mini in their Oxford plant, preserving 5,000 jobs in that plant. The right honourable gentleman knows that he could have taken no deal off the table by voting for the deal. But if he wants to talk about economic forecasts and the future of economies, perhaps he should give a little more reflection on the fact that the forecasts for Scotland show that its economy will grow slower than the rest of the United Kingdom over the next 4 years under an SNP government in Scotland.
Chris Green! Thank you, Mr Speaker. Cross-party work can be immensely beneficial, especially when delivering on the people's priorities. So will my right honourable friend agree with me that the excellent work of Farnworth and Kearsley First, working with the Bolton Council leadership, which is now Conservative, to win an award for the Future High Streets Fund, because we can all agree that our high streets are the keystone of our local communities.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that I think the point he makes is an absolutely excellent one, and what we have seen in the example he's quoted is the benefit of cross-party working. This can be immensely good, immensely positive for local communities. I'm delighted to hear that Bolton Council's bid for Farnworth Town Centre has been successful in progressing to the next phase of the Future High Streets Fund. He's right, we believe in our high streets, that's why we've created the High Streets Fund, and this cross-party working by a Conservative-led Bolton Council has shown what can be achieved.
Alex Cunningham!
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Children as young as 7 are being groomed and exploited to commit crimes such as placing drugs inside their bodies to move them across the country, yet are often treated as criminals, not victims. There's also a sad lack of support for them, with 2/3 of councils having no plan for tackling this kind of exploitation and just half collecting the data on those at risk. If she wants to secure any legacy on tackling modern-day slavery, will she instruct the Home Secretary to develop a cross-departmental strategy to tackle this despicable crime and end the criminalisation of these vulnerable youngsters.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that indeed we are continuing our work on tackling modern slavery. I was pleased that the government responded yesterday to the independent review of the Modern Slavery Act, and we have taken on board most of the majority of the recommendations from that independent review. This includes, of course, looking at the independent child guardians that we have created, the concept that we created, looking at how they can give the support. The issue that he references of criminalisation of those who have been forced to undertake criminal activities was actually addressed in the Modern Slavery Act when it was put through this House. But we continue to look at what more we can do to ensure we are bringing an end to this crime, not just in the UK, but internationally as well.
Sarah Newton. Speaker, due to extreme pressure on services across Cornwall, leaders of our health and care services have declared a critical incident. The pressure has impacted on the Royal Cornwall Hospital in particular. This is extremely worrying for all families across Cornwall who rely on Treliske. Will my right honourable friend assure me that she'll do everything she can to enable health ministers to support leaders in Cornwall to resolve this situation as soon as possible?
Prime Minister. Well, can I say to my honourable friend that obviously this is a very important issue for her and for her constituents, and we're aware of the issues at the Royal Cornwall Hospital. We know the hospital is taking steps to rectify these. Of course, last winter, Cornwall Council was supported with over £2 million of additional funding to help alleviate the pressures on the local NHS Trust. But I can assure my honourable friend that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, is going to meet MPs to discuss this matter and recognises the importance of this issue for her constituents.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the run-up to the 2010 general election, the Conservatives in my constituency claimed that no children's centres would close, and yet within a matter of months they were closing them and downgrading those that remained. Now, Suffolk County Council is proposing to close half of those that remain, leaving just 4 full-time children's centres in Ipswich out of the original 9. So will the Prime Minister tell us what sort of guarantees the government can give for any future policies which they want the British people to believe?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, we recognise the importance of ensuring that children have access to high-quality care. We've been putting extra money into social care, including for children, but it's also about the sort of services that are delivered. It's important for us that we have taken a number of steps to improve the facilities that are available for looking after children in communities where those children require that. For example, the standards we've set for social workers. And we do see the number of children's services that are rated outstanding growing across the country. I think that's important. That's a government that is actually looking at the issues that matter to parents and matter to children.
Craig McKinley.
My right honourable friend may be aware that live animal export season out of Ramsgate Port is shamefully in full swing, with a further shipment due out tomorrow. Does my right honourable friend agree that long-distance live animal exports, particularly across the Channel to an unknown future, should not form part of any future post-Brexit agricultural policy, when we can be free of single market strictures which treat animals as mere goods?
Can I say to my honourable friend that obviously he has raised an issue that I know is of concern to a lot of people, and we are committed to maintaining our high standards on animal welfare and food standards once we've left the European Union. We will be replacing, of course, the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, and what we will be doing is enabling us, by being outside of the European Union, to take decisions for ourselves. So we will be able to determine these. I think that's an important and first step towards a better future for farming, for our natural world, but it is also important for us to be able to do that and to maintain those high standards and quality standards for which we have a very good reputation across the world.
Karen Smith.
Mr. Speaker, head teachers and parents in Bristol South tell me the lack of schools funding is impacting significantly on children with special educational needs, in addition to its wider impact on teaching across schools. Both the Prime Minister's potential successors now acknowledge schools are underfunded and have promised more money. Would she agree with me that this welcome new funding should be targeted at our most vulnerable children?
Yeah.
Well, as
Prime
the
Minister.
Honourable Lady knows, that we are already putting more money into our schools. We're already putting more funding into special educational needs. I recognise the importance of ensuring that special educational needs are properly catered for and that the needs of those children can be properly supported. That's why I'm proud of the fact that we have been putting more money into schools. What is important, of course, for schools is also what standards of education are provided within those schools. And, well, the Honourable Lady talks about teaching. Yes, teaching is an important element of that, and we thank all our teachers, both in mainstream schools and in special educational needs schools, for the work that they do day in and day out. And I'm pleased that we are seeing improved standards in our schools, and that means more young people, whether they're in mainstream schools or with special educational needs, having an opportunity to go far in life.
Ben Bradley.
Mr. Speaker, the consequences of not leaving the European Union are profound, from the loss of trust in our democracy and institutions to the economic impact of civil unrest. Can my right honourable friend help to dispel the myth peddled by some in this House that we could simply go back to the way things were? And could she share what assessment government has made of these risks?
Prime Minister.
I say to the honourable gentleman that I absolutely agree with him, that I think it is imperative for this House to deliver on the vote of the British people in 2016. I've said that on many occasions, standing at this dispatch box and elsewhere. I think it is important that we do that. We could already have done that. I'm sorry, I'm going to return to this theme, but we could already have done that had we had this House supported the deal. It will be up to my successor to find a way through this, to get a majority in this Parliament, but I agree that it is important that we do deliver trust in politics by saying to people, we gave you the choice, you told us your decision, we will now deliver on it.
Justin Madden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Vauxhall Motors in my constituency in Ellesmere Port has a future if we can avoid crashing out of the EU without a deal. But my constituents are very concerned to hear the Prime Minister's potential successors in recent weeks talk up the prospects of a no-deal Brexit. So will she tell them both in no uncertain terms that if they pursue that option, they will consign thousands of jobs in my constituency and beyond to history?
Prime Minister.
The honourable gentleman could have voted to save jobs in his constituency. It's no good. It's no good Labour MPs trying to deny this. They had the opportunity 3 times to vote to leave with a deal, and 3 times they rejected it.
And Mrs. Theresa Villiers.
We are going to leave Prime Minister's questions at this point after questions earlier on from Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, because we're going to return to the dramatic news that just broke before PMQ started, which is that Sir Kim Darroch, ambassador, now former British ambassador to the United States, resigned. And this obviously was as a result of his memos being leaked, his memos about Donald Trump and the US administration. And it seems, according to his own statement, that he felt it was the only responsible course was for him to step down and to allow the appointment of a new ambassador. He said, the current situation is making it impossible for me to carry out my role as I would like. The debate, of course, last night between the two men who would like to be Conservative leader and Prime Minister also talked about the issue of Sir Kim Darroch. Let me just show you this tweet from Sebastian Payne at the Financial Times, who says Whitehall sources told the Financial Times that Sir Kim watched Mr Johnson in the televised debate last night, Tuesday evening, and saw that the next likely Prime Minister was someone who, when the chips are down, was willing to throw civil servants under the bus. Laura.
Yeah, I've also been told that Sir Kim was aware of the debate last night. He watched, he saw Boris Johnson fail to give him his direct backing, and as a result of that, he decided that his position was not possible to continue. It's worth saying he was due to retire anyway and to move on in January, and the assumption until last night's debate was, although this was all terribly awkward because he was going anyway, well, somehow people would sort of muddle through. But the debate last night is what changed the dial for Sir Kim in his view of whether or not he could carry on. And I think, you know, Boris Johnson hasn't even moved into number 10 yet. The widely held assumption among the Conservative Party is that he will be the Prime Minister in a fortnight now. But this is the first major act of a premiership that is still hypothetical. That was the chain of events, an explosive hostile leak against Sir Kim. President Trump then visibly goes after our most senior diplomat. Our potential next Prime Minister fails to back him. And then all of a sudden, one of our ambassadors finds himself in an impossible position. And I think it's just worth repeating, just before we went to Prime Minister's questions, a senior member of the government said to me earlier this week, no country would ever allow another country to change its, to be forced to change its ambassador. That is what just seems to have happened. It's a big convention just broken.
Was it a mistake for Boris Johnson not to come out wholeheartedly and support the UK's man in Washington in that debate?
Well, was it a mistake for him politically or just in general? I mean, I think it would have been really difficult because that probably would have been a lie. I don't think he had any intention of keeping Darach on if he becomes Prime Minister, because as that FT tweet from Sebastian indicates, there is a perception among Brexiteers of a lack of impartiality when it comes to civil servants. Whitehall sources who may be pro-Remain telling the pro-Remain FT in no uncertain terms that Boris Johnson is willing to, quote, throw civil servants under a bus. It's no secret that Sir Kim is ardently pro-Europhile. There are concerns about the opinions he's expressed about the US president in these memos. I think we can all agree that he deserves the privacy of having the memos kept private and an inquiry is ongoing. But there may be some in the Conservative Party, and indeed Boris backers, who think that it might not have been the most appropriate appointment. That's the argument. You know, there's this talk about impartiality, but you look at all of the rhetoric around a figure like, for instance, Ollie Robbins, and there's the suggestion that a lot of civil servants are anti-Brexit and, by consequence, anti-Boris.
Alistair?
I think this is really dangerous stuff. We've had this before. When Mrs Thatcher became the Prime Minister, people said, oh, she can't govern because they've had so many years of Labour that they're all anti-Tory. And then when she left office, Tony Blair said one of the biggest mistakes the Labour government made was so many ministers believed they'd all become Thatcherites under Mrs Thatcher, and the civil service wasn't impartial. The civil service is impartial. This is dangerous stuff to start to say that there are Conservative sources that believe some are so pro-European that they would give false judgment, they would give unfair judgments, they would stop doing their work because of their attachment to the European Union. This is where politicians make crass mistakes, and you start to get a civil service that says, well, if that's the way it's going to go, we are going to have to dance politically to the tune of our masters. You will then change the nature of the independent British service, and if there is any of my colleagues who think that they can move or should move civil servants that they believe are not as Brexity as they are, they're making a serious mistake.
Do you think there are some?
I suspect there may be, but it's unwise. It's unwise. It's a classic mistake of people who come across those who don't have opinions that they share and say, well, because you feel like that, you can't be doing your job properly. How many civil servants do you want to go through a test of civil servants to see how they voted? Is that what we're going to get into?
I don't disagree with you with what you're saying about it being worrying. I'm just merely saying that's the perception. And even to have Whitehall sources, so-called impartial Whitehall sources, briefing this to the FT is in itself raising questions about how civil servants... And equally, there's history, isn't there? Because Boris Johnson was the former Foreign Secretary and came into criticism within the department, let alone outside it, which may question whether the judgments of some in that particular department, when it comes to Boris Johnson, are fair.
Are these the long-lasting implications, though, Laura, when you look at this discussion about the neutrality of the civil service? One watching might say it's impossible to prove complete neutrality on every issue, and removing, or Sir Kim Darach rather, resigning and being replaced by somebody who is more like, or certainly more supportive of the sort of politics in the United States, is also showing a lack of partiality.
I think there are a few things to say here. First off, the referendum result in 2016 was a real shock to the political establishment, to use that phrase. And I think that set the kind of backdrop for a lot of the suspicions that arose on the Brexiteer side. But when you talk to many Brexiteers who've actually been in government, to a man, it's nearly always men, they say, actually, my officials were amazing. They were excellent. They were carrying out my instructions. Of course, there have been frustrations, but the other thing about this debate, and I think it's really important for our audience to understand this, when people get very upset about these kinds of things for all sorts of obvious political reasons, but it gets ministers off the hook too. You know, a lot of the criticism that was directed at Ollie Robbins time and time and time again, he was working for Theresa May and acting on her instructions. Now, in a time of political hostility on all sides, it is not surprising that politicians on all stripes, remember last week, you know, there was a story about Jeremy Corbyn, the attitude of the civil servants towards him, decide that it's an easy target to go after officials who can't talk back, who are trying their best in often very different circumstances. But can we say that there has never been an episode where ministers who've wanted to be radical have encountered really stiff resistance? Of course we can't. I just want to bring, we've got some quotes from Jeremy Hunt, I've just got from his team, who has, of course, is the current Foreign Secretary who stood up for Sir Kim Darroch in the debate last night. He says, I'm deeply saddened by Sir Kim Darroch's decision. He served his country with the utmost dedication and distinction. But it's interesting, he goes on to say, I profoundly regret this episode has led him to resign. He also says that it's outrageous that this has happened as a product of a leak. Sir Patrick McLaughlin, who's part of Jeremy Hunt's campaign, but interestingly says it's unedifying to see someone who wants to be Prime Minister failing to stand up for hard-working civil servants who've done nothing wrong. And I expect if Boris Johnson gets into number 10, this is going to be a theme, isn't it? This is going to be something that runs. But I think we're in very, very difficult territory here, and it's the kind of convention we shouldn't just chuck it out of the window without a backward glance. These things matter.
And relationships matter, though, don't they, Alistair? And when working with civil servants, of course, ministers give instructions to civil servants. They are carrying out their duty. But relationships matter, and the relationship with the United States is critically important. Would it be better to have somebody who is more aligned, at least with working with the United States? Not more aligned with the politics of Donald Trump, but more aligned with working with the United States?
Well, certainly what Kim Darroch's sacrifice has done has created this opportunity for a consideration of who would be best in that role now in the United States. And regardless of the circumstances, which have been pretty terrible, I'm obviously full square with the Foreign Secretary on this, it does provide that opportunity to look at who would now be best. Someone with a political background, someone with a trade background, someone with a diplomatic background. It is a prized diplomatic post, but I'm sure there'll be careful consideration of who would be the right person.
Well,
let's have the full confidence.
Let's get reaction from the Foreign Office itself. Let's talk to Alan Duncan, a Foreign Office Minister. Alan, your reaction to his resignation, Sir Kim Darroch?
Well, I'm both upset and angry. I'm very upset for Sir Kim, who was a supreme diplomat, and I'm angry that he has not been adequately supported at this end by the likes of Boris Johnson. And of course I'm angry that a presidential sort of explosion, if you like, has seen him off when there was no basis whatsoever for the scale of the anger we've seen coming out of the White House.
Did he do the right thing, Sir Kim Darroch, in the circumstances, stepping down?
I think it's in the nature of our diplomats who have integrity, honour and decency that they will follow their conscience. And the conscience was that he is a dutiful man who felt that the President had made his job impossible. So I think even if the Prime Minister had said, I'm not going to accept your resignation, he would have insisted, not because he's done anything wrong, but entirely out of a sense of duty to act in the long-term interests of this country in its relationships with the United States. But the need for this is zero. It's utterly unnecessary. It's something, I think, which is really making MPs today very angry, particularly because Boris Johnson, a former Foreign Secretary, and he thinks a future Prime Minister, instead of supporting our diplomat in Washington, basically dived for cover and threw him under the bus.
Is that how you feel about what was said in that debate last night with Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt?
I most certainly do feel that, and I can tell you I'm not the only one. It's the main mood here in the House of Commons today. I think the sort of respect held for Boris Johnson has taken a serious nosedive today.
Right. I mean, if you are Sir Kim Darroch and he was watching that debate, as our political editor has said, I mean, is it really the case that that sort of string of events was what precipitated his resignation, not supported by whoever may become the future Prime Minister in Boris Johnson's case?
I don't know the precise moment that triggered it. And in a way, that's not the point. I think the broader point that Boris Johnson, at a time when actually he was being tested in many ways about whether he is a Prime Minister who would support his country or not, failed in that test.
How difficult, though, is this complete diplomatic furore in the middle of a Conservative leadership contest?
Well, I mean, a lot of people will have voted, of course. It may well be that a lot of people who voted will want to have changed their mind on the back of this. But I think it's not so much the contest that matters as the result, and what then is the composition, reputation and conduct of the government that follows. And I think that's been thrown into some disarray, because instead of having a clean start in a mood of unity and sort of national confidence, I'm afraid, you know, Boris Johnson, possibly our future Prime Minister, looks a bit tawdry on the back of this.
I mean, it looks to some people, and it's been discussed in this studio, that our foreign policy to some extent has been outsourced. It's been left to the President of the United States to dictate what happens.
Well, certainly the appointment of an ambassador could be described as such. But we must have the confidence of our own policy. And, you know, if we end up disagreeing with the President of the United States, because that's what we have to do in order to defend our national interests and the policies we think are right for us and the world, then that's how it will have to be. But just being a supplicant like this, which seems to be the Boris Johnson attitude, is not going to do us any good. And all it means is that we're going to be trampled over again and again and again in the future, because ingratiating oneself to someone of this nature is not going to pay dividends.
Now, of course, you are not a Boris Johnson supporter. I think that's probably quite clear. But just
well spotted, Joe.
What was that?
Well spotted.
Yes, thank you for my Sherlock Holmes detective skills. But just to clarify, obviously, for the audience, who do you think and what sort of person should replace Sir Kim Darroch?
Well, luckily, we have a rich pool of talent of top diplomats, and I believe it should be a diplomat. And not some sort of person who's never had any diplomatic experience. Because diplomacy and being ambassador in Washington is not just a matter of being chummy with the President of the United States. It's about a whole range of duties and obligations throughout the whole country, by the way, not just Washington, which involve all of the flow of information and policy making and links into the United Nations and things like that, which I think only a trained diplomat can properly do unless they are an exceptional person who's had very, very extensive foreign policy experience.
Who should appoint the next ambassador?
The Prime Minister, either this one in the next 2 weeks or the next one.
Who would you prefer to appoint?
I think probably the sooner the better.
Right. So this Prime Minister. Laura?
Sir Alan, it's Laura here in the studio as well. I was just going to ask you, how worried are you that the convention that no country could reject or have influence over who we choose as a nation, that precedent has just been broken by this?
Well, I think it could be seen that way, but then we are dealing with a president who does not follow any of the normal rules of international diplomacy in the way he conducts his presidency. But they are the most important country in the world, and they are our closest ally. So I think this is a very, very unsettling and destabilizing course of events. And I say again, the president's fury was not in any way justified by the content of the documents that were leaked, and it most certainly would be proven to be much less justified by him looking at the whole of the last 2 years. I mean, it is an absurd outburst in response to an ambassador doing his job. And I've no doubt that in the face of our Brexit difficulties, there are quite a lot of critical, spicy telegrams going from London to Washington from the US Embassy here. That's what we'd expect. We wouldn't object to that.
Just before you go, Alan, was Sir Kim Darroch's position untenable? We've heard from Camilla Tominey here in the studio that there are likely to be more allegations or more stories around him and his position and what he thought about the administration in the Sunday papers.
Forgive me if I'm very tough on you for using the word allegation, because that suggests wrongdoing, and the application of that word is utterly inappropriate in the case of Sir Kim Darroch. Now, you are right to say that maybe there are some more diplomatic telegrams which clearly have been illegally taken and leaked, But again, it is the job of an ambassador and his team to report faithfully back to London about what they think is going on in the country. And if they say, you know, there's been a row in the White House or something, it doesn't mean that they're taking sides. They are reporting. So reports of fact and analysis are not necessarily a government's view or an ambassador's view. They are perceptions.
All right.
And no one should be blamed for that.
Alan Duncan, thank you very much for joining us. I must introduce Philippa Whitford from the SNP. I'm sorry that's been delayed because of obviously the news about Sir Kim Darroch. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, I think the job of civil servants and indeed diplomats is to report honestly to ministers and to report what they see from their experience. You know, the danger is we end up with a sort of McCarthyism of if you're not a dyed-in-the-wool Brexiteer, we're not having you. And we already saw kind of pro-Europeans being cleared out shortly after the referendum, which means there weren't enough people saying, are you aware of this problem? Are you aware of the issues of drugs? Are you aware of European Medicines Agency? And we can't afford to have that. These people work for different governments. They have an expertise, whether in country or not. And the issue here is that it was leaked. Absolutely, as Alan says, their job is to report, oh my goodness, this is going on. You need to be prepared for it. And I'm sure that telegrams going the other direction will be just as brutal around what's happening in the UK at the moment.
What is the focus at the moment in terms of the leak and who was behind it, which obviously we've discussed all this week? I mean, if that is going to be now certainly what Theresa May would like to get to the bottom of, and obviously the Cabinet Secretary too, what should happen if they find out who was behind those leaks?
Well, I'm no more aware of the background to that work than any other Member of Parliament would be at the moment, but my sense is that the enormity of it is increased by what's happened, and the chain of contacts will be examined very carefully, because there has been a deliberate leak designed to harm. It has cost someone the job as well as the relationship. How has all this come about? And I think already it would have been a very, very top-level inquiry to find out what had happened. There will be even greater urgency now from all. And, of course, the implications are it may not just be this. Unless you find out where the leak is, there could be others and others at risk.
There was great anxiety in government about this earlier in the week, and a senior figure told me that actually there are very many people who could have accessed these DIPTELs, the diplomatic telegraphs, because there are a certain number of terminals that have access to confidential notes. It would have been quite feasible for anybody who had access to one of those terminals, I was told, to sort of go back through the archive. But they were very hopeful because of that they will be able to find electronic fingerprints and work out who it is. I just want to pick up briefly on something Alan Duncan said. It may well be that those many MPs in the Conservative Party who are very hostile to Boris Johnson already, for them this actually really ratchets up a lot of the problem. Tom Tugendhat, for example, who's a up-and-coming, very well-respected politician in the Tory party, chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, has just said online, leaders stand up for their men. They encourage them when they they encourage them to try and defend them when they fail. I think we can understand the point he's trying to make there. But Mr. Johnson himself, speaking to reporters this lunchtime, asked about failing to stand up for Sir Kim, has said, in my view, it's wrong to drag civil servants into the political arena.
All right, well, apparently Boris Johnson has been out and about on a visit to Wetherspoons Pump in central London. I mean, picking up on what Alan Duncan said about Boris Johnson and about the fact that he felt some of those Tory grassroots members, the ones who are voting in this contest, may be thinking they should change their minds.
Well, I think Alan Duncan, because of his position, is completely qualified to comment on this and raise his concerns. But it's also political point scoring. He doesn't like Boris Johnson. He's never supported him, and he's one of his fiercest critics. So we should perhaps take his own partiality on the issue into account. As far as members are concerned, I think Tories being Tories, 75% will have already returned their ballot papers. And actually, the average Joe on the street might have an opinion about the appropriate nature of the language that Darroch used. Whether or not they agree with the leaking of the language, they may have felt that the language in itself wasn't particularly diplomatic.
Alan Duncan spoke as a minister. He spoke absolutely straightforwardly about his
Boris,
concerns.
doesn't he, Alistair?
Well, he's worked with him.
But that they are known to be enemies of sorts.
Well, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't.
Anyone, I think, would have seen last night's events and seen a potential Prime Minister letting someone go very publicly. I don't care well, Alan may have his reasons, which seem amply justified in terms of what has happened. I work with Boris Johnson. I'm not voting for him either. I think he described absolutely accurately what had happened. I think Boris Johnson now has more questions to answer than before. Will it affect the result? I suppose it probably won't. Will it affect the Prime Minister-to-be's future? You bet it will.
How would you deal through
future.
ambassadors and diplomatic staff in other parts of the world, in actually other parts of the world which are dangerous, to have watched that debate last night and have the sense, oh my goodness, he doesn't have my back.
All right, but how do you deal then with the United States? But how do you deal with the United States when you don't agree with everything or anything, perhaps, that the president? But you know, how would you approach it? How would you treat President Trump? There was a debate over whether he should have had the red carpet rolled out for him. Was that a mistake? Theresa May was, to some extent, insulted and trampled upon by those tweets too, in the way that she had dealt with him.
Well, obviously part of the problem came because she rushed off as soon as she became Prime Minister in quite a supplicant position, and that's really the position that the UK is ending up in. It's absolutely not right to think of replacing Sir Kim Darroch with someone who will just be going along with everything Trump says. There are going to be difficult negotiations trade-wise. It will be important to have diplomatic staff in America who are willing to actually put the UK's side of things, not just to suck up to Trump.
We've already had policy differences and they've been perfectly properly handled. The United States has taken decisions in relation to the Middle East, reducing support for Palestinian refugees, making decisions on the future status of Jerusalem, with which the United Kingdom objected and said, no, this is wrong. And it was handled perfectly properly. So the fact that we disagree, as Alan Duncan has said, is in the normal warp and weft of relationships, and it's done at sensible level with decent language, agreement to disagree. What the President indulged in over the last couple of days was way beyond that.
You've counted us out of the programme. From all of us here, bye-bye.
Oh well, that was a bit of a long slog, wasn't it? Jesus. Alright, so next up is Panorama. Considering that's from, well, technically yesterday now. We'll do Panorama next, and then the last stream will be the day before yesterday's Politics Live. I had to drop it because of the head-to-head. So I had to bin that off. If I would have started 15-20 minutes earlier, I could have fitted both of them in. But unfortunately, yeah, I didn't notice the time. So next up is Panorama. So stick around. I think it should be on this stream thing, but just keep refreshing my page. You'll see it eventually anyway. So I'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes. I need to let this one die first. So stick around if you want to watch Panorama. See you in a second.